There we are. Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the Power of Productivity. I'm Joe Wainz from TurtleWorks. We help companies work successfully with Microsoft 365. And today I have Steve Hyer from IGD Solutions. And IGD has a focus on websites, e-commerce, and web applications. And Steve and I are going to talk about the classic question of when should I buy a web application or when should I build a web application? And really, this conversation is not restricted to web applications, but we have a lot of expertise in that area, so we're going to talk from that perspective. So, welcome, Steve.
Thank you.
All right, so Steve, I've been your customer for 20 years. I know you, I trust you, and I want to build an HR system. Would you do that for me?
So the answer for a very simple question can get very complicated very quickly. And the first thing that I would shoot back to you is, what do you think an HR system does? Do you have one that you're using now? What does it do? Why are you looking for a new one? Are there features that are missing? And I think, it certainly makes sense if there's something that you can subscribe to as a software as a service, if there's something you can purchase and just install and it's going to do what you want it to do, I would say, please don't try to build something. If there are shortcomings to those systems, absolutely, those are some times that it makes sense to start looking at, hey, is there a feature that you can't get in an off-the-shelf system? Well, how do we provide that feature? Is that something we can just provide separately and integrate with something off the shelf, or is that something entirely we've got to build a whole system?
I
Uh,
think you hit on two things. One is absolutely no system's going to solve all our problems, so we do have to fill those gaps somehow. So that's where guys like us step in, and we can build some system integrations or extensions, whatnot. The other thing that I bump into is when you have a larger system, say an HR system or an ERP system. Um, Businesses don't often realize the amount of effort, the amount of resources they have to assign to those systems to keep them up to date, to keep them current, to make them work successfully. And so they often throw out their hands up and say, well, my system is crap and I need a new one. And that's something I've run into, and I'm guessing you have as well.
Yeah, we run into a lot of cases where the customer just wants they have a problem and they need to fix it as soon as possible and they need something to fit in there and even they don't want to take time for documentation. And so, the minute an employee changes or a minute, they want to do something else with it, it's like just figuring out what it was designed to do in the first place is an epic challenge. And so I think, the resources needed to maintain even an off-the-shelf system, there's a certain amount of knowledge and training that goes with that is really the case in both systems, whether or not you buy or build.
hmm So years ago, I was asked to build an ERP system, and I said, "You guys are out of your minds. There's 100 of them you can buy off the shelf. You already have one." And part of their problem was they weren't really assigning the resources necessary. But I look at that and go, when is a system too big to build? Or is a system too big to build? What are you thinking about that?
Well, I think, the last thing you want to do is try to build something that's going to take, more than several months worth of effort at one time. And I think that really sets up a recipe for disaster. If you're going to roll, if you're going to try to build something in 6 months and launch it at that point, it's very rarely a 6 month build and then done and then you walk away. It's much better in most cases to build a piece of it, start using it, refine that piece, add another piece, another module, another section, more functionality. And if you build it as you're using it, or even as you even decommission those features in another system that you're using, or sometimes it's decommissioning spreadsheets and paper processes that are still in place. One at a time, you have a much higher chance for success rather than ending up in a year or two development cycle. It's supposed to be 6 months, but now you're starting to add features and make changes, and other people are getting involved as you launch and say, well, what about this? And that wasn't considered. And in that case, I mean, you could go years before you're actually using something, and in that time, you have dollars going out in development costs, and you're not seeing any of the benefit of productivity. And unfortunately, the longer you go, the more the requirements are going to change. By the time you're done, you've built something that doesn't fit anymore because things have changed. And so I think, kind of how do you eat the elephant? One bite at a time. It's the same kind of thing, I think, when you're building complex software pieces. The smaller feature sets that you can roll out at a time. Roll out what you need right now, most important, that you can start using and experience that efficiency gain that starts to help you. You start to see your return on your investment much quicker in that case.
That's a responsibility you and I have when we're dealing with clients, is to help them understand that we can't eat the whole elephant all at once. And they want to. They're like, I pull out my checkbook. Let's go. I'm ready to do this. And it's really not about the money. It's about the fact that if we build this in bites, you're getting ROI all along the way. So let's get a feature or function done, put that into production, so you are starting to gain some benefits from the investment you've made. And then we do the next step. And it takes some work to get there. It takes some work for them to understand that. And it takes work along the way too, because they get excited and, they see what we've built and they want to add a bunch of bells and whistles, because it just won't be right if we don't add those bells and whistles. And you know what? Sometimes drinking water is the perfect thing and we don't need to add anything to it. And let's drink water first and then we can get into other stuff.
Absolutely. I've had projects where before we even launch, it's like we've rebuilt major pieces of it because, somebody else gets involved or, they throw something else in the mix. And it's like, what a complete waste. Your monthly spend may not change if you phase it in because you're still using the same amount of resources. But what you just said, Joe, the company starts to realize that efficiency, that return on the investment. And then there isn't that, redoing of something that you haven't even used.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
You gain to get where you want to go actually faster than trying to do it all at once.
Mm-hmm. So that is actually part of the reason that I have the company called TurtleWorks, is just like, guys, where's the finish line? And we need it to be close. We're doing a sprint here. We're not doing a marathon. Let's get to that finish line and not be distracted by a whole bunch of other things. And then we can do the next phase, the next function, the next feature. So I want to say there are things that we almost always build, and what comes to mind is a term called middleware. And I'm wondering if you agree with me and if you got anything to add to that.
Yeah, I would say, first of all, middleware is a confusing term because in IT, there are many confusing terms, right? Like, the cloud is just this drawing that means 150 different things depending on how you reference it. Broadband is another one of those things. Like, what exactly does that mean and how many different things can it mean? I think middleware is in that boat where middleware is a technical term that was invented well before the internet, I think, that really speaks to how do two systems communicate with each other. And there's a translation that happens. And I think way back in the days of like hotel reservations and FTD florists and some of those things where systems had to interconnect.
FTD florists?
Before the internet allowed everything to talk to each other in a common way. There were pieces of software that had to be built to translate. Well, how do reservations come out of my system and go into your system? And so these pieces of software would do that translation. And I think you can think about middleware as really a translation software of, hey, you're speaking Polish coming out of this system. You need to translate that into English on the other side. How are you able to do that? And the middleware system allows you to do that. Sometimes there's some interaction involved at that level, but this is a way to connect maybe a system you built with a system that exists. It might be a way to get data out of one system and into a report system. QuickBooks comes to mind as something that if you're using that, if you're a smaller company, you may be using QuickBooks and you need to have things coming in from various other areas. You might have customer lists and things going out to various other systems. And some of those pieces exist and you can buy. In other cases, you're connecting with a system where there isn't a connector and you have to build it.
Yeah, often that's exactly it. There isn't something that exists that you can buy off the shelf today to connect QuickBooks to Twitter or, something. And that's where you fall into, well, I have to build it. Now there are some platforms that help you get along the way for building that middleware, but you still have to build it. You still have to leverage those platforms to do it. And I I like to think of this idea that there are gaps within our systems. So we have some core systems, and they answer most of our problems as far as how to deal with our process and how to get work done and how to communicate with people. But there are gaps in those systems that we need to fill somehow. And middleware is sometimes the answer to that, to
Mhm.
filling that gap. Yeah, so and then what is middleware? System integrations. It is really sort of the big category of middleware, is connecting two different systems. Yeah, for sure.
If you find yourself or your team manually entering orders from one system into another system, or you're constantly, moving data, maybe you're exporting something and importing it into another system manually, those are prime cases, sort of simplistic cases, but that's where middleware can come into play, where, we have plenty of customers who are testing e-commerce, and it doesn't make sense to integrate right out of the gate with their systems because they don't know what their volume is going to be. But once
Hmm.
you pass, I don't know, 2 or 3 orders a day, the tedious nature of manually entering them, it doesn't make sense anymore. It's time to automate. Whereas if you get one order a month, it's probably not worth the time it would take to build the integration. But if your orders are paying for that integration, the profit on those orders is already paying for the automation. You could save a lot of effort by having an order automatically flow back into your billing system or shipping system, and generate the necessary label. It cuts down a lot on manual entry errors as well, right? If
Hmm.
you're retyping zip codes and things like that, you probably have a package or two going to the wrong place just from simple human error.
So friends don't let friends do manual data entry. That was in one of my first live stream discussions, and it's really a great statement. And there are tools, right? So Steve and I can build that kind of middleware to take care of that manual data entry. There's platforms for robotic process automation that will help to do that as well. You still have to build using those tools, but there's a lot of opportunity, and I can think of just 2 or 3 customers come to mind right now, and we're saving over 100 hours a week for those 2 or 3 customers by some work we've done. I mean, that's real money, folks. When you take 100 hours times, a $50 burden labor rate times 52 weeks, that's well over $100,000 a year that you're saving by
Mhm.
building a solution that maybe it's 15 grand to get it off the ground. Maybe it's 5, maybe it's 30. It's still, your ROI is there in the first year.
And we've run across some cases where our clients are so nervous about automating something that they've had their finger on, and they're have the pulse of it right in their hands because now it's going to be automated. And usually in those cases, building in kind of a manual verification step, at least initially until everything gets worked out, is a great way to handle it. In some cases where maybe there's so many one-offs that you need a human step in there, that's something that can be built in. You can still eliminate the data reentry and
Hmm.
at least start at a place that can then be customized. I don't know that, many cases you don't have to adjust your business process just because of technology. You can adjust the technology a lot to fit what you're doing. But there are points that, you could say, hey, is this really the best way to accomplish this? That would be a conversation that you'd want to have. But there are interim steps to going from completely manual to completely automated because your comfort in the process is important as well.
Hmm. Nice. Well, let's touch on some pros and cons. So, as far as building pros, I'm thinking one of the things that you get when you build your own system is it's tailored specifically to your business, right? You go through the process of defining requirements, and things get built, and you see prototypes, and you have some input, you're able to help steer the ship a little bit as the system gets built. And when you buy, you don't get that, right? You get whatever it is that they're selling. And maybe you've got some choices because there's 5 different systems out there and one of them fits your business closer. But that's a real pro is when you build your own system, it can be tailored specifically to your business. What comes to mind for you, Steve, as far as some pros for building and some cons for building?
Well, I think, number one, we have a lot of companies that will come to us and they say, "Hey, we're a Microsoft shop. Everything we have is .NET, but we have this PHP thing over here, and we wanna integrate with some other things. I don't want to run 2 back-end systems. Can you help translate that?" So keeping everything consistent in your same platform. When you build it, that's certainly the case. When you buy something, whatever it's in. You don't get to change it. It either runs on what you have or you're hosting it somewhere. You might need a separate server in some cases, when you buy something, because that's what that particular piece of software needs.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you build it, if you start using it and you think, well, if I could just have a button here that would save and add another one and pre-fill certain pieces in here. I was just working on a case that a piece of software that has patients in it. And it's very likely that the number of procedures that are being entered, the diagnoses are the same from the first one to the second one to the third one. So why do you have to re-enter them every time? We just added a button that said, "Hey, copy the diagnoses from the previous record," and that is a really easy thing to add. It's going to save probably 10 or 15 minutes per entry that applies to. So as you said earlier, that's real money, that real time that people are saving there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really helpful. And then I think there's an ownership piece too. When you build something, you own it. You should own it legally. There's some pieces you want to work out in your licensing, but if you own it, it could be a real competitive advantage for you. So if
Mm-hmm.
you have a great way to process orders, take care of your customers, maybe it's a servicing application that you built. You build machines for a plant. And having a system that has the consumables and replacement parts and the parts that wear out easily identifiable and easy to reorder in a system, that may be a huge competitive advantage for you, offering your customers something that you can do for them, make their lives much easier that some of your competition doesn't have.
For sure, for sure. So you touched on the fact that it is most likely quicker and cheaper to modify an application you built yourself than if you wanted to add a button to QuickBooks. I'll say good luck, right?
Yeah, what you got is what you got when you have some of those, out of the box purchased kind of systems. Now, granted, your maintenance costs in those cases are typically fixed. That's a real pro for something that you buy. It certainly could be variable when you build it because you're deciding what changes you want to make and what maintenance you need. And so that certainly could be a variable cost. However, typically when you're buying something, it tends to be cheaper from an upfront cost because you didn't have to put all the effort in to build it. They're spreading out that cost that it took to build it amongst all the hundreds or thousands of users, that might be using it. So there might be a lower cost of entry. There's that economy of scale that
Hmm.
certainly benefits you in that
Yeah,
case.
absolutely. Um, so and then from a buying perspective, if you buy, what I find is if you go to buy a system, there's a lot of thought that's already taken place regarding features, functions, shaking them down. How
Mhm.
should they best work? There's all of that research, logical work, testing that's occurred, which is a real advantage as opposed to when you build it, you've got to do that yourself. Now you're stuck if what they chose to build doesn't really align with your business, then it's not a fit. But if it does align with your business, it typically will be more robust, and it will cost less to get to that place.
And that's where, like, don't underestimate the time it will take to do that. In both of these cases, it requires resources up front to evaluate a system. If you're looking at a brand new system that you have zero system in place right now, maybe it's all in spreadsheets, and you want to implement something. In both cases, you're going to have internal resources, time from somebody's plate that's going to go toward either evaluating, systems you might buy, which I would absolutely start there. Or you're going to need to work with somebody to sort of architect and design something that's going to be built. In either cases, that is real time that's going to be required up front.
I can't reinforce that enough. That you've got to make that investment up front from a research perspective to determine what systems are out there. When it comes to ERP, I know a couple of folks that's their business is helping you find the right ERP that fits your business
Mm-hmm.
because that's not a trivial thing. That can take you a
No.
year to figure out, depending on your company size.
Even a simple registration system. It seems like, hey, we have events or classes or certifications, and you need to register for these things. Well, and there's a lot of registration softwares out there. If you buy one and it doesn't fit, and you've invested in it and learned it and done the training, and you realize while you're using it, 3-6 months in, well, this experience that my customers have isn't exactly the best part of this. Maybe you need to have hotel rooms to stay for something, and the way they book hotel rooms doesn't necessarily make sense or something based on how you implement it. Maybe the list of roommates in there is not right or something like that. Like that, there's real cost involved with then figuring out, well, now what do I do? Now do I have to build it? Well, I've just wasted 6 months and a lot of money and a lot of effort, on licensing to buy something. Now to restart it, that is a huge lost cause as well, in both money and productivity, when you seemingly make the wrong decision. Because you don't just decide an ERP system, right? You don't decide, oh, we're a year and a half in, we didn't pick the right one, let's start over. It doesn't really work that way.
No, heads would roll.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Heads would roll. Let's see. When we build a system, what typically happens is the people are engaged. There's some core users, power users, however we want to define them, project owners that are involved in the process. They help with the design and the requirements. And as we roll pieces out, they're so intimate with it, they know exactly how it works. And there's very little training required. When you buy a system, you've got to go through a training process. So there can be a cost from a training perspective that it will take you longer to spin up on how the system works if you buy a system.
And I would just say along that note, like, yes, working with somebody and matching their process is great, but I think we both had cases where, the people using it, or maybe people that are going to use it a little differently, aren't in the room and helping with the design. So when you roll it out, it fits one person's idea, but maybe not the other 3 people also doing that job. And
For
I find
sure.
that very common when you're doing a paper process or like an email and spreadsheet process that you're replacing. If there's 4 people doing that job, it's probably being done 4 different ways or tracked 4 different ways. And you're trying to find a common process to automate in a piece of software. Everybody really needs to be in the room or part of it on the early end of things, just so you don't end up with a system that takes account for one person's way of doing it and not everybody else's.
I'm thinking about an onboarding system that we built from scratch. It took us, I don't know, a couple months, 6 months maybe, to do the whole thing. They came to me with a flow chart, told me exactly what it was that they wanted me to build, and we built it and showed it to them along the way, and they're all yes, 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 yes. Well, it turns out that the people who put these requirements together and the people that were in the room constantly were onboarding like 3 people a year. And the HR people that were onboarding 10 people a week weren't in the room. So when we delivered the system and those people finally saw it, they're like, this isn't going to help us at all. So again, it comes back to us having to take some responsibility to make sure that those people are in the room that need to be in the room. And sometimes we have to step on toes and say, yeah, Mr. Manager, Mrs. Manager, you really don't know the requirements because you're not the user.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, we got 5 minutes or so left. Let's see, how can people get a hold of you, Steve?
Well, my email address is on the screen here, sjh@igdsolutions.com. My website is also down there, igdsolutions.com. My phone number is on the website. It's 248-625-0817. Any of those ways, everything except smoke signals, I think, work to get a hold of me. And I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions. If I could have a 5-minute conversation with somebody and help steer them in the right direction, even though that may not be work that we undertake, that's something, if I can help somebody, I'm more than willing to do that.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And if you want to get a hold of me, my information should pop up. There we are. So Turtle.works, and phone numbers on the screen, and Jay Wainz at Turtle.works. So takeaways. I like to give people some things that they can walk away with, and of course they're free to call or contact us, and we'll help answer some questions and set them on the right path. But so when does it make sense to buy?
I would say buy if you can buy. If it is at all possible for you to buy, buy. In the few cases where the system that you can buy doesn't do what you need it to do, it may be the case that you want to add one feature to that, and you can still buy and then build something to add that feature to it. That would be my preferred suggestion. If there's something out there, find it and evaluate it and see if it makes sense. Do your best to fit and add on top of that. If that doesn't work, then you're in a place where you have to buy, or you have to build.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say get to that place when you have to. Don't build something that already exists that you think you can do better. At that point, you want to add on to what's out there. Don't try to rebuild something that's already there.
I think you hit it on the head. Paint yourself into the build corner, right? Mm-hmm. So try to buy if you can buy. Absolutely. And something that came to mind when Steve and I were talking earlier is that sometimes you're talking with someone who's in the space, and you're asking questions, and they're not able to say 3 words. I don't know. Right. Mm-hmm. There are certain people in the IT world that can't say, I don't know. So they're going to tell you some bad information. They're going to lead you astray because they're not comfortable saying, I don't know, or let's do some research. So
I deal with it internally, even with some of my developers, where they'll say, they'll come back and say, it can't be done. And I laugh out loud because it's like, well, of course it can be done. Are you telling me you don't know how to do it? Are you telling me, we have 20 hours for this and it's going to take 100 hours? Like, it can't be done is not a good answer for me at any point. And I think, kind of digging a little deeper there and getting at what are we really talking about here? If anything can be built, but if you're trying to save, an hour a month, and the system's going to cost $100,000 to build, obviously that doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. There's a point where it doesn't make sense versus it can't be done. But I think, be aware when people start giving you it can't be done, or, they're kind of beating around something. It might be time to get more expertise in the room or ask more questions.
Get a second opinion and a third opinion. Honestly, it's always informative, to do that. For sure. And when does it make sense to build?
When you can't find something that you're going to buy, it makes sense to build. If you have a process that's a really competitive advantage process that you can build some software to fit, that makes a lot of sense. There's more upfront costs, but in the end, it may help your business significantly if that process can save several people can work on other things that generate more revenue rather than data entry and data manipulation that can be automated.
Mm-hmm, for sure. And then, sometimes it's not as clear, and these are just some guidelines that we put together to help as you're working through the unclear decision of, well, do I buy or do I build? It's not real obvious. So core systems require human capital resources to keep updated and maintained. So if you're not doing that, do that first, and you might find out that your system you have is just fine, and you just needed to care and feed for it more than you have been.
And any system needs to be updated, upgraded. There are security concerns, there are patches, there are different things. There are operating systems that they run on that need to be updated. If what you're doing isn't, let's say your system can't run on the newest version of the server operating system, well, that's a problem. It's time to update. I mean, we run across several systems that are running on older versions of Windows and things. It's a time bomb waiting to happen, because if that server goes down, you can't spin up. You shouldn't spin up an old version to continue to run it. You can't update the software in a quick enough way to keep your business running. So, asking that question of what are my options when this breaks is a good way to help inform, hey, what do I have to do from a maintenance perspective to make sure that my business is not in jeopardy.
Yep. So building a system from scratch allows you to tailor that system to fit your business, but it's going to cost more upfront.
Absolutely. And then, if you're buying a system, I think we all realize, right, we all use software in some way, shape, or form that, if you're using QuickBooks, what you get is what you get. Intuit decides what features get added, when they get added, how they work, what integrations are allowed and exist. And you can add to that, but when you buy it, you get what you get, and you're at the mercy of somebody else for product direction and support.
And sometimes it's fantastic with what you get when you buy. Like if I look at all the reports inside of QuickBooks, I didn't have to write any of those.
Right.
So, you get a lot of functions and features with mature products that you buy off the shelf.
Yep.
A custom built system, we touched on this early, but a custom built system, if you need to add a button to do X, Y, and Z, it's pretty straightforward to add that button. If you want a button added to QuickBooks, you're probably out of luck.
Yep. Absolutely.
And let's see. Well, the final thing is there's a lot of research and Q&A that's done in mature production or off-the-shelf systems. So they've tested really well the functions and features, and they've got a lot of feedback from customers, and bugs that were found that didn't get shaken out the first time. And that is an advantage to buying.
Yeah, if you're building, you are doing your own alpha testing, beta testing. You're finding your own bugs and having to pay for those bugs to be fixed along the way. As things get refined, that's certainly why the off-the-shelf sometimes is easier to implement upfront. But again, like the longer you run, if the system, if a built system fits perfectly, it may end up being cheaper in the long run, but don't think it's going to last forever, because that maintenance we were talking about earlier is absolutely a thing on all of the systems that we're talking about. It just manifests in different ways.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Steve, thank you. This has been a lot of fun and informative. I appreciate you taking some time out of your day to spend with me and talk about this subject. Well, we'll see everyone. Bye now.
Bye-bye.